This is the Enjoyer Podcast. I'm your host, James Dixon.
I've always wanted to say this, but Michigan Democrats are in disarray. Last week, a backbench House Democrat, Karen Whitsitt of Detroit, became the most powerful person in Lansing. She voted with her feet and denied Democrats the 56 vote they need to pass bills in a 110-member House. As we film this on a Wednesday, the Whitsitt movement has only grown. Now a Detroit Senator, Sylvia Santana, has joined Whitsitt in voting with her feet and voting against a lame duck agenda that would be political suicide for anyone who supports it. Among the Democrats' wish list items is driver's licenses for illegal immigrants. So, just for clarity and for explanation, lame duck is what happens after the election and before the current lawmakers lose power and leave office. Keep in mind that the last time Democrats lost the legislature, they didn't get it back for 40 years. And so their plan this time was to use these last 40 days to make the lame duck period count. But now they've run into two brick walls, one called reality and the other called unpopularity. Senator Mallory McMorrow said recently on Instagram that when Democrats called people this fall or knocked on their doors, they weren't well received. That they've saved all their lawmaking for the lame duck period means that the Democrats know that their agenda is unpopular. And that unpopularity is why Mayor Mike Duggan of Detroit, who leads the biggest, deepest blue city in Michigan, has walked away from the party he's known all his adult life. Duggan will run for governor in 2026 as an independent. In so doing, Duggan wants to offer Michigan a choice, not a weirdo. Whoever survives the Democrat primary will sign on to a host of unpopular items. The ad that won the election just now for Donald Trump, remember the one that said, Kamala is for they, them, Trump is for you? Yeah, that footage was based on an interview Harris did in 2019 when she was in the Democrat primary for president. Much like talking to the cops, whatever you say in politics can and will be used against you. And so in running as an independent, Duggan is doing what East Point did in 1992 when it changed its name from East Detroit. He's creating distance from undesirables. Our governor, Gretchen Whitmer, is in no mood to join the House Democrats in their ruins. Whitmer pulled a Whitsitt by announcing she would sign only the big and important bills that come out of Lansing. So what do we have here? Duggan, Whitsitt, Santana, Whitmer. Everywhere you look, Democrats are walking away from the left wing of their party. Don't look now, but the Michigan Democrats are in disarray. And as the old saying goes, may you live in interesting times. To make sense of it all, I'll be joined today by my friend and fellow traveler, Katie Heid. Katie covers Michigan for the Michigan News Source. Katie holds two traits that are unfortunately rare among journalists in Michigan: common sense and curiosity. Katie, welcome to the Enjoyer Podcast.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for that nice introduction.
Absolutely. Katie, we'll start you here. What do you enjoy about Michigan?
I was born and raised here. I only left for 5 years to go pursue my college degree and my master's degree, and I met my husband out of state. And I said, I love Michigan. Let's go back. And at the time, in the early 2000s, there were jobs here. And so I have a lot of history here, and we've made our home here. I love the concept that we have up north. I love our beautiful lakes. I love traveling here. I love the sports. I love the food. And I love the way we say "ope" every time we bump into somebody or make a mistake. So Michigan has always had a part in my heart. And so it does grieve me a little bit to see what is going on in Lansing.
Now, where did you two move from, and how did that conversation go? I think from what you're describing, it sounds like it was a little bit before the one-state recession years, so we didn't have quite that going against us. But how do you sell Michigan on someone not from Michigan?
we had met in Chicago, which is a wonderful city. We have wonderful memories of it. It does sadden me to see the direction that has gone in. But we had several other job offers, and I didn't want to move to North Dakota and some other job offer places that had extended a hand to me and said, hey, we want to give you a job. And there were a few available in Michigan. I said, come back to my home state and see what's so great about it. And that was 24 years ago. And here we are, raising kids and working our careers and living our life here.
You know, Chicago is one of our finer suburbs. I'm glad you were able to make it back. Going into Election Day, Democrats had passed half as many laws as they did in 2023, 156 versus 312. Then, after losing power, when it's too late to do anything more about it, they rammed through this wish list. Driver's licenses for illegals. We're going to ban blue and pink guns. I mean, just everything under the sun. They were talking about national popular vote. Katie, what's your read on why Democrats waited until lame duck to show their true selves?
I'm glad that you explained lame duck at the beginning, because so many people, we hear that term, but they're working their jobs, or they're trying to find a second job. They're raising their kids. They don't understand what it is. And I like what you said. It's that moment of time between the election and between the time of the other party losing power that they can get everything done, their agenda, their party's priorities. And in Michigan, we've had a Democrat majority for 2 years, where both the House and the Senate has been a Democrat majority. And on November 5th, voters, not just in Michigan, but in America, sent a message. They said the Biden administration policies are not working for us. And a byproduct of that was the Whitmer policies aren't working for us. And they flipped the state house. So Republicans take over on January 1st. Democrats know that their hold on power is limited. And I believe it goes back to what you said, that the Democrats have this idea of the kind of life that they want for Michiganders, or the life they want for Americans, and it involves these woke policies. But when they knocked on doors, they found out that people can't pay their bills, groceries are too high, gas is too high. We have safety concerns and crime concerns in our communities because of allowing illegal aliens into our communities. Law enforcement is struggling. We don't have enough prison guards to man our prisons effectively, an issue that Whitmer has ignored for close to 6 months now. So I just believe that the Democrats, they waited because they almost saw the writing on the wall. And what's interesting to point out is the writing is on the wall. Americans and Michiganders sent a clear message, and they still didn't get the memo. This is not what Michiganders want. They want the tipped wage law to be fixed before it goes into effect in February. So this would affect Michigan's hospitality industry. And Democrats are not moving on that. I talked to a Republican representative last Friday when the Republicans walked out of session in Lansing. They didn't go anywhere. They just walked out of the chamber. They said, we're willing to work. But they said that Joe Tate, the outgoing House Speaker, had gone back on a promise to address the tipped wage changes that would be taking place, and they're not. And so now that's something that Republicans have said that they need to take up on day one so that we can help Michigan's hospitality industry. And this just isn't affecting them now. If you think back over the last 4 years, Governor Gretchen Whitmer did her best through her policies to destroy the hospitality industry. If you remember her COVID lockdowns, we had restaurants
faced some of the harshest lockdowns, some of the longest shutdowns.
It was horrific. And what we did, because thank goodness my husband and I were both paid during that period, a lot of people are not, is we made a point to eat out at restaurants, or rather pick up the carry out. And then when we could go into restaurants at 25% capacity, we made sure that we did that. We made sure we tipped well, but not everybody could do that. So you have restaurants that are recovering from 2 major COVID shutdowns. And now you have this change in wage where tipped workers are not going to be paid a certain amount plus their tips. The tips are being eliminated. This industry is suffering, and legislators have apparently turned their back on this industry.
You know, it's incredible because the tip wages is kind of all people talk about. It's all people really want Lansing to do, and they don't do it. We have a 10 million person consensus that our roads in Michigan are terrible, and that doesn't get fixed. It's just, how does the stuff that everyone agrees on not get fixed while these kind of boutique issues are able to fly through? Help us understand the gap there.
I think it's a matter of playing politics. So you don't want to paint every politician with a broad brush, especially when you get into local politics or state politics, because there are people that are running to represent their community. And I still live in a world, there's still a small part of me that believes that the best ideas and the best policies can win. If you've been in this game even a minute, you know that it's the big money that often runs that. And so it's very baffling. So I think you have career uh, plans in place. Like these legislators have, some of them have said they're going to be a career politician. So they're always looking to that next step. So whatever might help them get elected or whatever might help them get donor money, they're looking at that, perhaps special interest. And so I believe a lot of people see that legislators, they're not representing me because they have these other things in mind. Civil servant is that phrase for a reason. You're supposed to go to office, do the work for the people that you represent, and then go home and allow someone else to go in there. And we have these
And
career
then go
politicians.
home. Yes.
Yes, and then go home and allow someone else to serve. And so when you get in there and you're enticed with donor money and what special interest can do for you and this quid pro quo and all of that, it's quite messy to use a word like that. And so I think people are frustrated, and that based on November 5th, that Donald Trump provides a refreshing change from the swamp, as he called it. And like nationally, Michigan certainly has a swamp here in Lansing.
You know, we've been talking about that. Just had Senator Runstead on to talk about the Lansing swamp. Just had Tom Barrett on last week to talk about the DC swamp, and he also came through Lansing. Help people understand. Like, so basically, we send 150 people to Lansing, you know, the 148 lawmakers, a governor, and a lieutenant. From the second they set foot in Lansing, they're outnumbered 10-1 by lobbyists. Help people understand the pressures that people face when they go to the Lansing swamp.
Well, the lobbyists have a interest in what kinds of laws are passed, what kind of bills go through. And so money talks, right? And they have an agenda and they want it passed. And so they're going to press people as much as they can. I've had people tell me stories off the record of some of the dirty tricks, so to speak, that lobbyists will do if you go out to eat with them and you're not going to vote a certain way, that they will continue to make your lives miserable. Now, that was something said to me, and I can't attribute it to a specific person, but I think we can all imagine that, yes, that kind of goes on. Look, oops, I can still hear you. That we have people that say, look, this is our agenda, and we know that you can probably push that through. We know a little bit about your past, or we know how you've worked in this job, and so we're just giving you a little leverage so that you can vote our way. I mean, there's all sorts of pressure. I would imagine that there's a lot of flattery too. We love what you did. We just love what you're saying, and so that feeds into people as well. Who doesn't like to be complimented for a campaign well run, or a job that they're doing? And so there's just a lot at play. There's a reason that we call it politics.
You know, my mentor John J. Miller, he always would joke at, like, if he's given a speech at a dinner, that politics comes from the Latin for meaning, you know, poly meaning many, ticks meaning blood-sucking animals.
That's fair. That is
so,
fair.
Katie, help us understand, what was the actual damage done? Lame duck, it looks to be cooked at this point. But what was the stuff that was actually done, which is to say, what will Republicans have to undo or try to? And what can Republicans now use against Democrats and saying, hey, this is what they did in the dark of night. This is what they did when they thought you weren't watching. This is what they knew was unpopular, which is why they waited.
Right. Well, these are some of the bills that were discussed in chamber, making it easier for transgenders to change their name, driver's licenses for illegal aliens, not addressing the firefighter staffing. And so you have driver's licenses for illegal aliens, but we're not going to address that. We have a shortage of EMS workers as well. I mentioned the prison staffing shortage. All of that has been ignored. They're not addressing the tipped wage as we talked. They did like the idea of giving money to low-income residents so that they could have an e-bike, which we're from Michigan, James. Can you imagine someone trying to get around in an e-bike in winter, and where are they going to charge it? But this was something that they thought was
when I see people
good.
riding bikes around now, it's just like your heart goes out, because that's a cold ride. And look, do some people do it out of fitness or whatever? Sure. But for the most part, people are on those bikes because they have to be. And I feel for them. But I certainly wouldn't give them an e-bike.
And it doesn't make sense, because with an
No.
e-bike, where are they going to charge it? What are they going to do? When it runs out of its juice, they are likely just going to leave it there. These are things that don't really make sense. Another bill they were looking at, banning ghost guns, bump stops, police destroying the weapons from gun buybacks. The list goes on. And it was Senator Jim Runestad that said, quote, "They're operating an assembly line of chaos."
I like that. And that to me is what Democrats bring. I mean, you talk about, so Democrats have a problem with borders in general. So we're going to open the southern border. We're going to open the border that keeps boys out of your girls' locker room and out of your girls' sports. And now with this license thing, we're going to open the border to the voting booth as well. That anyone, I mean, essentially we have trans voting in Michigan. If you identify as a legal Michigan voter, you can vote. And so, do you see anyone in Lansing who has the ability to message? Like, this is the scale of the damage that's being done to us intentionally. It seems like I'm mostly hearing it from the media. Are there any lawmakers you'd point to who have been, I guess, effective in their pushback?
I don't know if I can think of any specifically in this moment. I would maybe classify them as a small group of conservatives that are pushing back on that. And my question that I've never been able to get answered, and so maybe I'll put you on the spot, but why is this good policy for them?
Right.
Why is this good policy for the Democrat Party to give driver's license to illegal aliens? And we have a problem here in Michigan. We talk about a southern border, but we have a northern border, very close, where people can come in as well. And we have a problem with transnational gangs who are targeting high-end homes in Oakland County. They're from Chile and Venezuela, as much as law enforcement can tell. They've arrested one woman. It's an ongoing case, and now they're hitting those homes twice. So Lansing is saying, we're going to give documentation to people who have not come in the country illegally. We also have some that are robbing some of our citizens blind. It doesn't make sense. And like I said, there's a cognitive dissonance between the Democrats in Lansing and what message the voters sent a month ago.
Yes. And unfortunately, I know a few people on the conservative side, let's call them Chamber of Commerce types, who will make, well, wouldn't you want these people licensed? And the argument I always use is the idea that we should give illegals driver's licenses because they're going to drive anyway. Why wouldn't we give licenses to people who fail the driver's exam? Aren't they going to drive anyway? Why don't we give licenses to people who have 5 DUIs? So my read on why you would want to have illegals have these licenses, they want them to vote. The plan is that they vote and change the country in a way that's not easily changed back. We had a Chinese national vote in November, and the vote will count. And our Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, hasn't shown any interest in kicking that guy or documented dead people, documented people who've moved out of Michigan. So the purpose of a system is what it does. And everything Jocelyn Benson has done, we had Ruth Johnson on, a former Secretary of State, the one before Benson. And she was saying that in her last year, there was 54 people in Michigan who registered to vote whose registration, for whatever reason, didn't match their last four of their social security number. In 2024 alone, there was 35,000 such people under Benson. The purpose of a system is what it does. The confusion and the chaos that's been created is so you don't know who's going to vote, who's going to show up. It is, and plus, these people all have to live somewhere.
Right.
And so where they want to make your community less stable, less rich, and your kid's school. How well would your kid do if 3 more people join a 30-person classroom and they all speak Spanish?
Right. It affects the way we do life on every level. You brought up confusing. I was talking to a coworker about some of these things that Benson was doing over the last couple of months, and we both looked at each other and said, we're smart people. Why don't we understand this? And she said, Benson is making things confusing for a reason.
Yes.
So if the average person can't understand it, they're likely not going to take the time to try to understand that. And that's just because they're busy. They're living life. And politicians aren't making it easier for them. You mentioned the Chinese national that cast his ballot in Ann Arbor.
Yeah.
It wasn't the system that caught him. It was his guilty conscience.
Which to me, that whole story to me was like a psyop. So you're telling me you say a guy from Mexico voted. I don't like it, but China, I think that's the one country we all don't want to hear that people from China are voting, but it's what we did here. And then this detail about the only way he got caught is because he turned himself in. The argument I've always used is, so that's the one we know about. So if 10,000 people did what that guy did, and the other 9,999 don't turn themselves in, Benson basically just said they'd never be caught.
What was the remedy? His vote's going to count. Yeah.
Right. So to me, if Xi Jinping wanted to send a message to Michigan, battleground state, swing state, that your elections are not secure and I can prove it, what would he have done differently?
Right. It is not a good place for Michigan to be in. And this is why you have people questioning the security of our elections. And you have what I would call gaslighting by politicians, because if you go on X or you listen to the news or however you get the information from our elected officials that say our elections are secure, our elections are safe, we're saving democracy, you don't buy into these conspiracy theories, and then these things happen. Well, they're few and far between. And then we have the statistics like you mentioned. Michiganders are not crazy people. They're not making things up. No. And so when these things happen, we need remedies. We need systems in place. We don't just need gaslighting from people who are pushing an agenda. And to have a Secretary of State, too, that is so overtly partisan, I know that's one of the problems that Senator Ruth Johnson has, too. Like if you looked at Johnson's work, you wouldn't really know what party she's from. She's in charge of executing the law and making sure people have correct documentation, and you move on. And Benson went way over that. You knew what party she was affiliated with, and with someone who's putting the stamp on the election, people had the right to question her behavior.
Well, what I found troubling about her behavior, so she's followed around a few days before the election by David Marinas, used to be a good reporter at the Washington Post. What he wrote was awful. And then you saw the glee in her face on election night with CNN and the cameras and everyone's watching. The whole world's watching. And I could see that she liked that. I could see that she liked the idea that the whole world would be watching as they count votes in the musty basement of Cobo Hall. And to me, we've had 2 elections straight where we haven't had results that same night, and we're made to wait. It sends the message to the eyes of the world that Michigan can't count. And so that concerns me, is like, how do we come off to the rest of the world when we can never get our votes counted?
And how many years has Michigan been conducting elections where we knew before we went to bed at 11 o'clock at night the results of the election?
That was always the standard with worse technology.
Well, I have to say that I was flabbergasted working this election day that it was around 1:30 when the race was called for President-elect Trump. And then by the time we had our postmortem and wrapped up our Michigan news, I was in bed by 3:45. I was thrilled. I thought it would be an all-nighter. I thought it would be several days before we knew what
That was a heck of a night. I could not believe that it all wrapped. And that for me set in motion like basically the next month where I just couldn't sleep. I felt like a little kid where you're fighting sleep because you don't want to miss anything. And you just want to keep your eyes open because you're just afraid something cool is going to happen. Mike Duggan, mayor of Michigan's biggest city, Detroit, has declared himself, he's transitioning. He's a trans independent now. He's going to run as an independent, even though he's always governed as a Democrat. What did you make of his decision? Is it good politics? And what does it signal about the brand damage the Democrats have suffered that someone like him would walk away?
I don't know if it will help him necessarily, but I think he realized that he needs to put some distance between himself and the Democratic Party. They lost. Michigan lost its 15 electoral votes to Donald Trump. We have Whitmer who couldn't deliver. I mean, she helped Kamala Harris try to win the election after
and lost.
And lost bigly, to use a term of Donald Trump. LeVar Barnes, who's the head of the Democratic Party here in Michigan, is resigning because you don't lose elections and keep your job. So I think Duggan wants to put some distance between himself and that party. Whether he governs differently remains to be seen. But I think he needed to send a message, perhaps, to the powers that be.
Absolutely. And then Mallory McMorrow, I was looking at her thing the other day. We were all watching, is she going to try to run for DNC chair? Which I thought was weird because that's usually something people do when they've lost an election. Like, you lost, but the party's going to take care of you. It's not, if you can run for office, you'd rather be an active politician than in the front office. And so she said in that same post that when the Democrats called on people, they didn't want to hear from Democrats. And the upshot of it to me is that even someone as smart as McMorrow seems to think that messaging was the Democrats' problem in 2024. Was it messaging or was it reality?
I think their messaging was pretty clear about how they wanted to direct Michigan, how they wanted to direct the country. And voters said no. So I don't think it was a problem with their messaging at all. I believe
they were not an unknown commodity, right?
No. And we watched these things unfold every day. We knew exactly where they stood. And let me bring this up too. If you put your finger up to the wind, so to speak, of the political winds and kind of see which direction it's going in, is look at the behavior of Governor Whitmer on X. Leading up to the election, she was, from my vantage point, trying to be a social media star, trying to get viral clicks, showing that she was a relatable woman. She walked around the streets of Chicago at the convention. I'm cutesy, I'm demure. And we can't forget Dorito-gate, where she was trying again to be cute or trendy or connect with those younger voters, and showed a video of her feeding a Dorito to an internet contributor, and it backfired. She got ire from the Michigan Catholic community and people that said, I don't know much about communion, but this just has this not so subtle sexuality. It fell flat. If you look at all of that leading up to the election and then look at what she's posting now, it's very mild. Mm-hmm. It's extremely mild. It's gone a 180 from what she was trying to do to get Harris elected. It's gone back. And she even said a couple of weeks ago, I think Donald Trump has the best interest of Michigan in mind. I'm willing to work with him. If you look at her track record, I don't think that you can say that that's an altruistic statement.
No.
That's a political statement.
It's self-interest, like everything that has ever come out of her mouth. I mean, Whitmer, I see a woman who, I mean, let's talk about this. That Dorito communion video. Whitmer has never been a great teammate. 2014, she doesn't run with Mark Schauer. She lets him take that L to Rick Snyder, runs 4 years later and wins. 2024, has a chance to run with Harris. Yes, Queen. Doesn't everyone want the first woman president? Well, man, they should really want a woman vice president too. Passes on that. Bad teammate again. And then at the very end, when Democrats had tried to run from some of that stuff and seem reasonable, I mean, Alyssa Slotkin was making it sound like she was going to put on a sheriff's badge and go round up illegals herself personally by the end. And then you have Whitmer doing the Dorito communion, sending the exact opposite message. Are we sure she was trying to help Harris get elected?
Well, there's that train of thought as well. I don't think that she wanted to be in the race for 2024. Biden had passed her over for VP in 2020 because he painted himself into a corner and said that he wanted a woman of color. That rules Whitmer out, and he was stuck with Harris.
Which I guess orange is not a color in their world.
I guess not. Whitmer goes with pink for the Barbie. But I believe that she has her sights set on the presidency, and so she was willing to put her cheerleading behind Kamala Harris for this election, but she wanted to look farther out in 4 years. Whether or not she'll be successful or not remains to be seen. I don't think that she will gain or has gained enough traction nationally to be considered a superstar. She's polling extremely low in national polls.
And this was supposed to be her star turn. She timed it so that in the time after Biden tanked that debate, she would be the face you saw everywhere. And even as a Biden campaign co-chair, she wasn't talking about Biden. She was talking about herself, and her memoir was actually thinner than this notepad here. And it just, I think it was the ultimate act of disloyalty, but then it also didn't work. And then Trump won Michigan. And so it's like, what would you say you do here, Whitmer? Like, I don't really see a future. I mean, who is the Gretchen Whitmer voter 4 years from now when she's been out of office 2 more years? She's going to be a lame duck for these last 2 years. I mean, is it possible she already missed her window forever?
She may have. I think one of her downfalls in just looking, if I was her advisor, I would tell her that you have to respect the professionalism of the office. You have the highest job state, and you can still bring your own individuality to it. Everyone does, but you have to have a respect for that. And a governor should not be feeding Doritos to a digital content creator and then apologizing that Michigan's large Catholic community took her actions a wrong way, which, by the way, is not an apology. When you have
that's the Panera Bread apology. I'm sorry you feel that way.
Right, which is not, I am sorry I did that. That was a really unwise thing for me to do, and looking back, I would not do it again. I think she would totally do it again, but she was risking the fact that I'm cute. I did the Barbie campaign, the Governor Barbie campaign, and certain people are always going to like things and certain people won't, but you do that, and you're saying you're running for the office of the president, it's going to fall flat with a lot of people in middle America. And then the other thing is you do some deeper digging, is just looking at her policies that she's implemented or not implemented here in the state of Michigan, and the taxpayer money that she is forcing on these communities through the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, saying you're going to build these mega sites and they have Chinese connections, and the community is speaking out, but we're ramming this through anyways. You're going to elect someone with those policies to the highest office in the land. It doesn't work because Americans have said, we're not going to do this anymore. Look back at November 5th.
Yeah. I think it's incredible that a backbencher, Karen Whitsett, she's had a few headlines over the years, but it's always for this kind of stuff. She is what Mike Duggan proclaims to be. Karen Whitsett acts as an independent. Mike Duggan wants the label, but she actually does the stuff. And so, in denying Democrats that 56th vote that you need to pass a House bill, suddenly she becomes the most powerful woman and most powerful person in all of Lansing. Now a senator has joined her, a Democrat. So lawmaking is over for the year. What on earth pushed Whitsett over the edge and led Santana to follow her?
Right. Well, I'm looking back through my notes to find exactly what she said, but it was something to the effect of she's going to go home for the people that she's representing. She didn't want to take part in the shenanigans that were going on down there. And like I said before, that people were playing politics. Karen Whitsett, when you look at a few of the issues, she reminds me a lot of Tulsi Gabbard. I remember watching
Interesting.
Tulsi run in 2020, and I saw her on the debate stage, and I thought, this woman should not be a part of the Democratic Party because of the way that she's talking. She made so much sense. She was articulate. She had served her country. And as we saw the evolution, when she went independent and then, oh, forget it. Now she's in President Trump's cabinet. I think that there is room in Lansing for common sense on both sides. And we're seeing that with Representative Whitsett, with what she has done. And perhaps that can help the rest of the party as well say, what are we going to do to make lives better for Michiganders? Putting aside whatever we feel personally about woke policies, conservative policies, whatever it is, what is going to make their lives better? So I think she, with her actions today, and who knows how things will change as the day shakes out, she might be that beacon that they need to get realigned.
And Katie, we'll get you out of here on this one. Our governor, Gretchen Whitmer, pulled a Karen Whitsett by saying she'll only sign the big bills. So the wish list is dead and buried, and there'll be no further lawmaking. You have House, you have senators, all Democrats. You got the mayor of the biggest city walking away from the party. You have Democrats in disarray. But as far as tactics go, what you think to see that our governor following a backbencher and pulling the plug on lame duck, not leading from the front?
It might go to what I've seen in the national media, where many pundits have said the Democrat Party is not having solid introspection as to what went wrong on November 5th, what went wrong with that campaign, what went wrong with the messaging, or the kinds of policies that we pushed, how we approached people. And so I think that perhaps Whitmer is assessing some things, at least politically. I'm not talking about a come to Jesus moment necessarily personally, but politically looking at, okay, this is not what Michiganders want. I'm going to sign the big bills that are a little less risky.
Mm-hmm.
And because she is reading the room a little bit better than I think her national counterparts. And so I believe that she will have a lot of uphill climb as she goes into the new year, as we see the Republicans join power there in the House. Hopefully we'll see a little bit more of people working together, and hopefully Republicans will stand for what the voters in the state sent them to Lansing to do.
That's kind of my read on events too, is that when Republicans lost power in 2022, I think the lawmakers in particular, they failed to drive a contrast with the governor. And so one of the last things they did was fund the Q Line train in Detroit for 20 years with their power. And so I think a lot of Republicans were disillusioned and said, well, if you guys are just going to be Democrat light, heck with it. Who cares if actual Democrats run the state? That turned out to be a mistake. because Democrats don't run the state; they run the state into the ground. But what do you think the Republicans? They can't make policy, but they can stop policy. What would be a successful next 2 years with the Republican House?
I think they tackle the issues related to the hospitality industry. They have to do that day one because that February deadline is looming. They've mentioned roads, and I think anything that looks at the way that Democrats have spent money in the state the last several years, the amount of money that they've blown through. Now we're not getting any more ARPA funds, so those surpluses are gone. I think for Republicans, they definitely need to be looking at how to spend Michiganders' taxpayer money wisely, looking at the safety of the border of our state.
Yes.
Who are we letting in? Let's make sure this driver's license for illegal aliens is not something that we ever talk about again. There are legal pathways to this country. Let's support that. And Republicans just need to remember why people elected them. Fiscal responsibility, getting rid of the woke agenda. We don't want boys in our girls' locker rooms. They want to see those sorts of issues dealt with so they can get back to living a good and free life. And I would even say as a just a shout out to the hospitality industry too. And I remember Tudor Dixon saying this when she was running for governor 2 years ago, is that business is not very hospitable to the hospitality community. It's really hard. It's bogged down with regulation. And I think reaching an olive branch out to that industry and saying, we're going to axe the bureaucracy. I mean, I think DOGE, a department like the one Elon Musk and debate are running was wonderful for Michigan because we live in a state with 2 education departments, one elected, one appointed.
Insanity.
So
sometimes you have to just say stuff out loud, like what you just said. We have 2 education departments and we're a terrible state in education.
Right. And how much money is going to that? Workers that are still staying home.
Right.
Working from home, state workers. So there's a lot of fat to trim. And
absolutely.
I know that Whitmer uses the statement, oh, we're putting money back in Michiganders' pockets. Are you really? We would actually like to see some of that money back in our pockets or not taken out in the first place.
Yeah, if you guys need get in touch, I'm on Twitter at DownI75. If you need to know where to send that check that's going to be put back into my pocket, I can direct you to the right place. Katie, where can people find you on social media, find Michigan News Source?
So Michigan News Source is heard daily on dozens of radio affiliates. We have news at the top of the hour, so tune us in for that. If you're driving around in your car or working from home, you can also find us online at michigannewssource.com. I'm also on Twitter, and you can find Michigan News Source on Twitter, or X, I guess I should say, and also on Facebook. We'd love to interact with you. And we are very proud of news that we can say is real, honest news, so we hope that you guys reach out to us.
It's the rarest breed we have in Michigan, real honest news. Katie, be blessed and Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Merry Christmas to you too.